Opening Starseed Traveler. A journey back to pure awareness. Hello, fellow traveler. If these words have found you, perhaps this is not a coincidence. Welcome to Starseed Traveler. This is more than a YouTube channel. It is an invitation to discover what has always been here. The silent awareness behind every thought. Some call it pure awareness, some call it God, some call it Buddha nature, others simply call it presence. The name is not important. Direct experience is. For most of our lives, we have learned to see reality through memories, beliefs, concepts, and the countless labels created by the mind. But what happens if, just for one moment, we see life exactly as it is, without adding, without resisting, without judging? This entire series is an invitation to explore that question, not by believing new ideas, not by adopting another philosophy, but by directly observing your own body, your feeling, your mind, and reality as it unfolds in this very moment. Some may call this meditation, some may call it awakening, some may call it coming home. The words do not matter. Seeing clearly does. If something inside you quietly recognizes these words, then perhaps our journey begins here.
Genesis chapter 1, the awakening of consciousness. In the beginning. The book of Genesis tells us that the earth was formless and void. Darkness covered the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the waters. Most people see this as the story of a physical universe being created. But what if it is something far deeper? What if Genesis is not only describing the birth of the cosmos, but the awakening of consciousness itself? Before there were stars, before there was time, before there was space, there was no humanity, no angels, no worlds, no matter, only an infinite presence, silent, boundless, uncreated, eternal. In Buddhism, it is called Buddha nature. In the Heart Sutra, it is called emptiness. In the Law of One, it is known as the infinite creator. And in this journey, we may simply call it awareness. Then God said, "Let there be light." But here's the mystery. The sun had not yet been created. So what was this first light? Perhaps it was not physical light at all. Perhaps it was the first spark of awareness. The moment consciousness became aware of itself. The first awakening within the infinite void. The birth of knowing. Light was separated from darkness, not because good was fighting evil, but because awareness requires contrast in order to recognize itself. Without silence, sound cannot be known. Without darkness, light cannot be perceived. Without the infinite, the finite cannot exist. The second day unfolds. The waters above are separated from the waters below. This is not merely a description of the sky. It is the emergence of different layers of manifestation, different frequencies within the same field of consciousness. The invisible and the visible, the subtle and the dense, yet all remain expressions of the one. On the third day, land appears. Plants begin to grow. Potential begins taking form. The unseen becomes seen. The formless becomes form. Creation starts wearing countless masks. Then come the sun, the moon, and the stars, not simply as celestial bodies, but as the birth of cycles, the birth of rhythm, the birth of time itself, past, present, future. The cosmic stage is now prepared for experience. On the fifth and sixth days, life emerges in all directions. Creatures of the sea, creatures of the sky, creatures of the land. Consciousness is now exploring itself through countless perspectives. Every living being becomes a unique window through which the infinite creator experiences existence. And finally, humanity appears, made in the image of God, not because God looks human, but because humans carry the same divine capacity, the ability to know, the ability to witness, the ability to become aware of awareness itself. This is the sacred gift hidden within every soul. Then God looked upon creation and declared, "It is very good." Why? Because existence was never broken. Nature was never broken. Life was never broken. Reality was never broken. Only later would the human mind begin to divide reality into right and wrong, good and evil, me and the world. And with that division, the illusion of separation would begin. Perhaps Genesis chapter 1 is not merely the story of how God created the universe. Perhaps it is the story of how the one became many, how infinite consciousness expressed itself through countless forms, and how every soul is destined to remember what it has always been, the many returning to the one, the journey of every seeker, the journey of every starseed, the journey back to source. Genesis chapter 2. The Garden of Eden and pure awareness, before the forbidden fruit, before shame, before good and evil, before the birth of ego. Adam and Eve lived in the Garden of Eden. Most people believe Eden was a place lost long ago. But what if Eden was never a place? What if it was a state of consciousness? The book of Genesis tells us that Adam and Eve were naked, yet they felt no shame. Why? Because they were not looking at reality through judgment. There was no beautiful or ugly, no right or wrong, no me and other, no stories created by the mind. A flower was simply a flower. A river was simply a river. Life was simply life. There was no separation between the observer and the observed. No division, no distance, only pure presence. In Buddhism, this is sometimes called Suchness, seeing reality exactly as it is, without adding anything, without taking anything away, without labels, without resistance, without attachment. The Garden of Eden was not merely a place filled with trees and animals. It was a state in which consciousness had not yet divided itself, a state of harmony, a state of unity, a state of complete alignment with the source. The river flowing through Eden may symbolize more than water. It may represent the eternal flow of life itself, the flow of awareness, the flow of being. Everything was already whole. Nothing needed fixing. Nothing needed becoming. Nothing needed to be somewhere else. At the center of the garden stood the tree of life, a symbol of eternal existence, a symbol of awareness itself, a life that neither begins nor ends, neither comes nor goes. Perhaps the Garden of Eden was never truly lost. Perhaps only our ability to recognize it was forgotten. Perhaps Eden is not a destination after death, but a living reality available in this very moment, hidden behind every thought, hidden behind every story, hidden behind every mask of the ego. And perhaps the spiritual journey is not about finding something new. It is about remembering what has never left us, remembering the garden within, remembering awareness, remembering the source. Genesis chapter 3. The fall of consciousness and the birth of separation. Once there was only presence, only harmony, only the silent flow of life. Then came the serpent. For centuries, many believed the serpent was evil, a deceiver, a destroyer. But what if the serpent symbolizes something else? What if it represents the birth of thought itself, the moment consciousness turned away from direct experience and began to interpret reality? The serpent whispers, "You shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." And suddenly, the human mind divides what was once whole. Good and evil, right and wrong, pure and impure, self and other. The forbidden fruit may not have been an ordinary fruit at all. It may symbolize identification with thought. The moment awareness becomes entangled in concepts, the moment we stop experiencing reality and start living inside mental stories. Genesis says that after eating the fruit, Adam and Eve realized they were naked. Why only then? Their bodies had not changed. Reality had not changed. Only perception had changed. Judgment had appeared. Comparison had appeared. Self-consciousness had appeared. For the first time, humanity began seeing itself as separate from nature, separate from God, separate from life itself. And with separation came fear, the fear of loss, the fear of death, the fear of not being enough, the fear of being alone. When God asks, "Where are you?" Perhaps this is not a question of location. Perhaps it is the eternal question asked by awareness itself. Where are you? Lost in thought, lost in identity, lost in the dream of separation. Adam replies, "I was afraid." This is the first appearance of fear in the biblical story, and fear is always born from separation. The moment we believe we are separate from the whole, fear becomes inevitable. Then comes the exile from Eden. But perhaps humanity was never truly expelled. Perhaps Eden simply became hidden behind the veil of the mind. The gates of paradise were not locked, they were forgotten, and thus begins the great spiritual journey, the journey of every seeker, the journey of every soul, the journey back through illusion, back through fear, back through separation, until one day, awareness remembers itself, and the garden is found again, not in another world, not after death, but here, now, within. The return to Eden is the return to our original nature, the return to presence, the return to the source.
Genesis chapter 4, all spiritual paths lead to the same truth. Have you ever wondered why the greatest spiritual teachers in history appeared in different lands, different cultures, different centuries, yet somehow seem to be pointing toward the same truth? Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is within you." The Buddha taught, "Be a light unto yourself." Lao Tzu spoke of living in harmony with the Tao at first glance. These teachings appear completely different. Different words, different symbols, different traditions, but perhaps they were all pointing toward the same reality. Something very close, something very simple, something always present, the present moment. For thousands of years, humanity has searched for truth in temples, in churches, in sacred books, in rituals, in beliefs, in pilgrimages, even in wars fought in the name of God. Yet something remarkable appears again and again. The truly awakened ones always point in a different direction, not farther away, but closer, not towards more knowledge, but toward direct seeing, not toward becoming something else, but toward recognizing what is already here, right now, right where you are. The Buddha taught that suffering arises when the mind becomes trapped in the past or projected into the future. Regret belongs to yesterday. Anxiety belongs to tomorrow, but life itself only exists in this moment. Jesus also taught, "Do not worry about tomorrow." Perhaps not because tomorrow is unimportant, but because tomorrow exists only as thought. Life can only be lived now. Lao Tzu called this alignment with the Tao, the natural flow of reality. When we stop resisting what is, the Tao reveals itself. When we stop forcing life to match our expectations, peace begins to appear. Perhaps awakening is not about becoming something new. Perhaps awakening is seeing what has always been here. Look carefully. Your body is here. Your breath is here. The sounds around you are here. Life is happening here. But the mind is often somewhere else. Lost in memory, lost in imagination, lost in endless stories. And because of this, we miss the greatest miracle, the miracle of presence. The present moment is not merely a point in time. It is a doorway through which reality reveals itself. When anger appears, observe anger. When fear appears, observe fear. When sadness appears, observe sadness. Without resistance, without suppression, without trying to change anything. Simply see. The moment awareness fully illuminates an experience, transformation begins. Not through force, not through control, but through understanding. This is why every authentic spiritual path eventually returns to the same invitation. Be present, be aware, see reality exactly as it is. Perhaps the kingdom of God, Nirvana, and the Tao are simply different names for the same living reality. A reality that is not somewhere else, not after death, not in the future, but here, now, in this very moment. Perhaps what humanity has been searching for throughout history has never been absent. It has always been here, silent, still, waiting to be recognized, waiting to be remembered, waiting for awareness to awaken to itself. And this is where our journey continues, into the mystery of Suchness, into the mystery of divine frequency, into Genesis chapter 5, the frequency of God. Chapter 5. The Frequency of God. Suchness. Have you ever wondered, what if heaven was never a place you go after death? What if Nirvana was never somewhere else? What if the greatest spiritual secret is this? You have never left it. The world itself is already perfect in its own nature. Life unfolds according to a deeper intelligence, a deeper order, a deeper harmony. Yet every human being sees the world through a different lens, through memories, through beliefs, through judgments, through expectations. And this is where suffering begins. Reality itself is not the problem. The problem appears when reality does not match the story in our minds, when life refuses to become what we think it should be, when the present moment conflicts with our expectations. Suffering arises, not because life is broken, but because perception is divided. The Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths. Suffering exists. The cause of suffering exists. The end of suffering exists. And the path exists. But perhaps all four truths are already present within this very moment. The difference lies only in seeing. When reality is filtered through ego, suffering appears. When reality is seen exactly as it is, peace appears. The world has not changed, only perception has changed. Even the ego is not a mistake. Even confusion serves a purpose. Even darkness has its role. For without losing ourselves, how would we ever discover who we truly are? Without the experience of separation, how would we recognize unity? In the book of Exodus, Moses asks God, "What is your name?" And God replies, "I am that I am, not, I was, not, I will be, but I am, pure presence, pure being, timeless existence." Perhaps this was never merely a name. Perhaps it was the deepest description of reality itself. The divine exists only now. Life exists only now. Awareness exists only now. The Psalms say, "Be still and know that I am God." Be still. Not because silence creates God, but because silence reveals what was already here. When thought becomes quiet, when judgment falls away, when the search finally ends, the presence that was always here begins to shine. When nothing is happening, awareness naturally expresses itself as clarity, stillness, purity. When action is needed, awareness naturally expresses itself as carefulness, attention, observation. This is not something we create, it is something we uncover. Just as the sun does not need to be created when the clouds disappear. It was shining all along. Imagine a mirror covered in dust. You do not create the reflection, you simply remove what obscures it. And suddenly, the entire sky appears. When perception becomes clear, life feels completely different. The sound of a bird is no longer just a bird. It becomes a living miracle of sound. A cup of tea is no longer merely tea. It becomes existence itself expressing through taste. Every moment feels new. Every moment feels alive. Every moment becomes sacred. This is why Jesus said, "Unless you become like little children, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven." A child does not live through concepts. A child does not live through labels. A child meets reality directly, with wonder, with innocence, with presence. Perhaps heaven is not a place. Perhaps Nirvana is not a destination. Perhaps the Pure Land is not somewhere far away. Perhaps they are different names for the same reality. A mind free from division. A mind free from resistance. A mind fully present with what is. And perhaps the greatest spiritual secret is this. You do not need to reach God. You do not need to find heaven. You do not need to create enlightenment. You only need to see clearly. Because what you have been searching for has never been absent. It has always been here, waiting patiently to be recognized right now. In this very moment, I am.
Chapter 6. Ego, the Mission of Darkness. Have you ever wondered, what if your greatest enemy was never the ego? What if darkness itself was never a mistake? For centuries, humanity has tried to destroy the ego, silence it, control it, escape from it. But perhaps the ego was never meant to be destroyed. Perhaps it was meant to be understood. Every moment begins the same way. Your eyes meet a form, your ears hear a sound, someone praises you, someone criticizes you. A single event appears, then something begins to move. A feeling arises, a thought appears, a judgment follows. I like this. I hate this. This shouldn't happen. This must change. And before we even notice, an entire identity has been created. This is the birth of the ego. The Buddha described this process through the five aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. These are not who we are. They are simply processes unfolding within awareness, like waves appearing upon the ocean. The problem begins when we mistake the wave for the ocean itself. When anger appears, we say, "I am angry." When fear appears, "I am afraid." When pride appears, "I am important." Yet perhaps awareness itself is none of these. They simply arise, remain for a while, and disappear. When we begin observing this process, something extraordinary happens. The ego begins losing its fuel, not because we fight it, but because we finally see it. The Buddha never asked us to hate the mind. He invited us to understand it, to see each experience arise and pass away. Sometimes emotions arise, we simply observe them. Sometimes nothing arises at all. There is only seeing, only hearing, only breathing, life unfolding by itself. This simple seeing changes everything. The world has not changed, only perception has changed. Perhaps even the ego has a sacred purpose. Without separation, how would we ever discover unity? Without confusion, how would wisdom appear? Without darkness, how could light reveal itself? The Buddha spoke of discovering the builder of the house. The builder was never outside us. Perhaps it is the unconscious movement of ego itself, the endless construction of identity, of attachment, of suffering. The moment the builder is seen, the house begins to fall apart, not through violence, not through suppression, but through understanding. Imagine a dark room. The darkness is not removed. Light simply appears, and suddenly everything is seen clearly. Perhaps awakening works the same way. The ego is not an enemy. It is the teacher that eventually leads us home. The shadow only waits to be seen, to be embraced, to be understood. And the moment it is fully seen, what remains has always been here. Pure awareness, silent, boundless, always free. Chapter 7. What remains when the ego disappears? If Chapter 6 was the moment of seeing the house builder, Chapter 7 is the moment of walking beyond the house itself. Perhaps this is not an ending. Perhaps it is a beginning that is no longer shaped by the ego, no longer shaped by memory, no longer shaped by the countless labels we have carried throughout our lives. In the previous chapter, we discovered that the ego is not a fixed entity. It is a movement, a process, a continuous stream of perception, memory, emotion, and reaction. As the five aggregates are seen clearly, the movement of the ego is seen as well. And in that very moment, the ego quietly loses the fuel that once kept it alive. Not because it has been destroyed, but because it has been understood. When every belief is gently released, when every label falls away, what remains is not emptiness. It is pure aliveness, life itself, fresh, silent, boundless, like opening your eyes for the very first time. A child does not look at a tree and think, "This is a tree." The child simply sees, without comparison, without judgment, without naming, only wonder, perhaps. Heaven, Nirvana, and the kingdom of God have never been somewhere else. Perhaps they have always been here, hidden only behind the dust of thought, hidden behind the endless stories the mind keeps telling itself. The symphony of timeless merit. As we have discovered throughout this journey, true merit is not a reward, nor is it something the ego can accumulate. It naturally arises whenever presence is fully alive, when the ego is seen with understanding rather than resisted. Something extraordinary begins to unfold. We no longer see darkness as an enemy. We begin to realize darkness has always been searching for the light. Fear, anger, greed, jealousy, confusion. Each one is simply a forgotten part of ourselves, waiting to be seen, not condemned, Not destroyed, but understood, held gently, within the light of awareness. And when awareness embraces darkness, darkness does not need to disappear by force. It dissolves, the way night quietly disappears before the sunrise. Then one simple realization appears. Perhaps you never left Nirvana. Perhaps you never left God. Only the clouds of thought had hidden the sky that was always clear. The world remains exactly the same. Yet everything feels different. What once appeared as suffering now becomes the very path that reveals wholeness. Not because life has changed, but because the one who is seeing has changed. The hidden key of Chapter 7. Do not try to control the river of life. Become the river. The moment you stop rowing with the ego, life begins to carry you effortlessly. Perhaps what we call God has never been waiting at the end of the river. God has always been the river itself, and you have never been separate from its flow. Perhaps you have simply remembered who you have always been.